The second antinomy of apocalyptic humanism is called Felix Culpa. And that's a mystical term, kind of a term that you find in occult literature and Christianity, and also in psychoanalysis to some degree. Felix Culpa means like it's like a happy wound, and or that's the translation. That kind of sounds stupid putting it that way, but this theme that like everyone has encountered in more or less cliched forms, that like you think you have a wound, you think that something is wrong, and you struggle with it, and then you realize at some point down the road that it was actually a gift, and that it would seem like a problem at the time sort of drove you to claim your destiny and become who you really are, that kind of thing. And this is an antinomy. So again, an antinomy is something that at the current horizon of intelligibility, you can make a watertight case for either of two opposing views. It doesn't have to be two, but I'm usually painting it as two in this series, and it will only be, if ever, at sort of a higher level of knowledge that we'll be able to see how the two are two sides of the same coin, or solve it, or whatever. And so this idea of Felix Culpa comes up a lot in questions about like why there is a world, why was the world created, and or really, I guess the best way of putting it is that it comes up with the question of the problem of evil, which is kind of the same, but not quite the same, because we could imagine there being a world that had no evil in it, at least intellectually. Although, I mean, maybe to be a world, there has to be evil, and like because to be in a world we have to be able to evaluate things and have norms and judge, and without some minimal amount of evil there'd be no way to judge things as good. But that's not the point I'm making. That's kind of a side point. So I've encountered this a bunch. As I mentioned, the theme of the crucifixion points to this, and you can find it in the work of Blake, and in Nietzsche, and in Deleuze, the theme of the death drive, and the sort of philosophical use of the death drive, the sort of ontological death drive. They all perform this this like kind of sideways answer to the problem of evil, right? So why is there evil in the world? Like, if there's a God, why does God let there be evil? Or even if there's not a God, why is there evil? And you start trying to answer the question, and then there's a particular, maybe you go through different options and show why they don't make sense, they fall short. And then there's some like sudden shift of perspective that takes place in this process of like meditating on this problem. And like it's a really kind of slippery move, where basically all of a sudden instead of like answering the question that you were asking, of like, well, why is there evil in the world? You sort of have this apprehension of your own finitude and the impossibility of taking on a perspective that is all encompassing enough to judge the world as a whole. So, like, who am I to judge X, Y, and Z as evil when God works in mysterious ways and I can't see all of His design? Like, kind of that's part of it. But also, you sort of suddenly find yourself um, having been motivated to give meaning to reality. Um, there's like a creative act that takes place as you're contemplating the origin of all things and the problem of evil. And that creative act, you know, that is the solution to the problem. That is the answer. Um, it's the answer is the answer that you gave. Um, and so again, it's kind of immanentizing things. It's kind of claiming this finitude, um, where like what you arrive at is more of a sense of um, the freedom of finitude to sort of the ability to kind of tell a story, um, to make sense of reality, not because you've like taken reality and you've actually discovered an underlying reason that was already there, but in a different way you make sense of reality, right? You give meaning, um, you give meaning to reality, you put meaning into it, and that is this kind of very deep freedom, this very high freedom. um, and then you kind of get that like maybe the position you were in when you were sort of worried about this question before didn't make any sense, and that's there's some kind of like transcendence in that. And so it can, and this is no joke. This is a real thing. I think people who suffer trauma and that kind of thing will actually have this experience, and there are analogs of it in the process of being an artist and making works of art and having a practice. And um, there's that phrase, "My wound existed before me," which Deleuze loved. It's by some poet whose name is kind of spacing on. But um, so anyway, that's all one side of this antinomy, right? So you can say, all right, um, why is there evil in the world? Well, and then you do this process, then you realize, oh, there is no evil in the world. And you can kind of you can scale it a little more too, or have it be more of a straightforward thing by sort of suggesting that the problems that society has right now, like they will be redeemed. It will have been something like that. It will have been worth it to go through, um, like all the problems that have come with industrialization and exploitation and the kind of psychological malaise um, of modernity, because it will kind of cause us to push through into a new era that where the human condition is solved and so forth. Um, so, yeah, there's that. The thing is, um, or not, you know, and um, uh, like as deep as that whole way of viewing things is, and as rewarding as it can be, um, it's a pretty tough sell to suggest that all the suffering there is in the world right now and not to mention all that has ever been in the world, will be redeemed, will have been worth it. Because it also really seems on the face of it that, first of all, um, in so many individual cases in people's lives, like people just get the short end of the stick and sort of have, um, you know, very difficult lives, and then they just die, and that happens all the time. And and they don't, they're not in a position to go through the kind of existential languor of converting woe into joy. And and that view can be uh, used to justify an unjust social order. Um, where actually things, you can never tell. Like maybe the world could be a lot different and could be a lot better, um, as it is, and there doesn't need to be some process. And this kind of myth, this kind of Gnostic myth of loss and redemption, is like a mask for power relations that are just like exploitative. And and that's a strong argument against accelerationism. Like accelerationism would be the view that we just, the most important thing is just improving technology, because technology will make life better, and it will make society more equal, and just hold off on the other stuff. Just don't stop the process, because as difficult as it is, um, outcome of the process will be very positive. And that's not impossible at all. Again, this is an antinomy. So I don't know either. I don't know that one of these sides is right and the other one is wrong. Neither do you. Um, and that not knowing, we're sort of fixating on the Socratic aspect of philosophy here. That not knowing can be empowering. So anyway, that there's a case to be made for that, um, but it's there's a strong case to be made that it's actually just masking um, unjust an unjust social order that could just be changed, and that is basically ideology. Um, and it's difficult because um, uh, usually people who have that view of kind of just go with it, they're also more in touch with the sort of working details of the economy and state of the art of science and so forth. So they usually have more concrete knowledge of how the world actually works, which in a way gives them all the more um, justification for having the view, like, trust me, it has to be like this for now. um, but that's also them just being more invested in things staying the way they are. Uh, so yeah, I think that generally, anyone, learning about how the world actually works, and what current geopolitics is actually kind of going on throughout the world, not just in the flashpoints that media focuses on, is very important. And but yeah, openness. I mean, like, it's not, for example, in hardcore Christian eschatology, uh, the dead are raised from the dead and given new lives with new bodies in heaven. So, maybe there are people who die unjust deaths after having had bad lives, but if they weren't sinful, um, they have a new life in heaven. Um, and that's not, it's not impossible. No one's ever proved that it won't happen. So Yeah, Antinomy 2, The Problem of Evil, and Felix Culpa.